Russian forces operating in Ukraine are facing severe operational difficulties during the winter period, as freezing temperatures, logistical disruption, and sustained Ukrainian counteractions reshape the situation along the front. Military analysts and Ukrainian officials say the conditions have imposed a heavy cost on Russian units attempting to hold or advance on positions across southern and eastern Ukraine. The front line, stretching roughly 1,200 kilometers from Zaporizhia toward Kupansk, has become one of the most critical sectors of the war, where winter weather, Ukrainian drone surveillance, and artillery pressure are limiting Russian mobility and supply. Images captured by Ukrainian reconnaissance drones show Russian soldiers positioned in snow-covered forests, waiting motionless in freezing conditions. According to Ukrainian observers, many of these troops lack adequate winter equipment. Some units reportedly rely on outdated cold weather gear, including coats dating back decades. While certain soldiers are equipped with anti-thermal camouflage suits intended to reduce detection by drones, large numbers of troops remain exposed to harsh weather. Analysts say these conditions have affected not only infantry, but also Russia's armored forces. Heavy equipment such as the T-90 and T-80 main battle tanks has been observed struggling to maneuver across frozen or snow-covered terrain. Vehicles frequently become immobilized in ice, snow, or mud, slowing Russian movements and creating vulnerabilities for Ukrainian drone operators and artillery units. Ukrainian surveillance over supply routes has also complicated the delivery of fuel and ammunition to Russian armored formations, forcing some units to remain stationary for extended periods. As a result, Russian formations deployed across the southern and eastern sectors are often waiting under constant threat of aerial observation and strikes. Ukraine's leadership has presented a different picture of the situation behind its own lines. On March 1st, President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared before cameras in Kyiv, emphasizing that the capital continues to function despite months of sustained attacks on energy and infrastructure. Ukrainian officials say recent military developments have allowed Ukrainian forces to regain control over multiple settlements along several parts of the front. According to reports referenced by Ukrainian military observers, approximately 8 settlements and a territory spanning around 300 kilometers have recently been retaken in operations conducted during the winter months. Additional smaller counterattacks carried out during February 2026 near border sectors, identified in reports as the Kekefe and Sunumi areas, reportedly resulted in the liberation of several more settlements. Estimates vary, but Ukrainian-linked reports indicate the number of recovered locations could be between 10 and 15 when combined with other recent actions. Taras Chmut, president of the Comeback Alive Foundation and a member of the Defense Management Agency Supervisory Board, described the moment as a notable shift in momentum. Chmut said that for the first time in many months, possibly years, Ukrainian forces are liberating more territory than they are losing. Independent military assessments, including mapping analyses by the Institute for the Study of War, suggest that Ukrainian actions along the Zaporizhia to Kupansk axis have begun to place pressure on Russian defensive positions. Ukrainian airborne formations played a key role in these developments. The 82nd and 95th Air Assault Brigades, operating under the command of General Alexander Apostol, launched a large-scale offensive along the Alexandrovsk direction. Ukrainian paratroopers advanced despite heavy resistance and reportedly forced Russian formations to withdraw beyond administrative boundaries linked to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Military observers described the operation as one of the most significant recent moves affecting the situation around Zaporizhia. By disrupting the corridor used by Russian units attempting to push westward, Ukrainian forces effectively blocked a key operational route that had been considered an important logistical artery for potential Russian advances toward the Dnipro River. With this route under Ukrainian control or pressure, Russian maneuver options in the sector have narrowed. Further south of Zaporizhia, Ukrainian reconnaissance and special units also conducted operations targeting Russian defensive positions. The 132nd Separate Reconnaissance Battalion of the 7th Rapid Reaction Corps reportedly breached defensive lines near the Alexandrovsk direction. Ukrainian sources say trenches were penetrated and Russian logistics routes in the southern sector were disrupted, leaving some Russian positions within direct range of Ukrainian artillery systems. According to Ukrainian reports, these developments have created growing operational strain on Russian troops deployed in the region. Estimates cited in Ukrainian commentary suggest more than 50,000 Russian soldiers in and around Zaporizhia face difficult conditions as commanders attempt to maintain defensive lines while preventing unauthorized withdrawals. Troops in several sectors are reportedly exposed simultaneously to winter conditions and ongoing Ukrainian drone strikes. At the same time, the broader conflict continues to intensify across multiple fronts. Russian forces remain active in eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Donetsk region, where heavy combat has continued since the beginning of 2026. Ukrainian forces have launched a series of operations aimed at weakening Russian positions and limiting the effectiveness of armored formations. Drone warfare has become a central element of these operations, with Ukrainian units targeting Russian tanks, artillery systems, and air defense infrastructure. Military analysts say these developments highlight how technological warfare, combined with environmental conditions, is reshaping the battlefield. Precision drone strikes, surveillance capabilities, and attacks on logistics networks are increasingly influencing the balance of power along the front. While the war remains highly dynamic and costly for both sides, the winter campaign has exposed significant challenges for Russian forces operating across southern and eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian military operations across eastern Ukraine have increasingly focused on precision strikes against armored vehicles, artillery systems, and air defense infrastructure. Ukrainian commanders say the objective is to weaken Russia's ability to maneuver along the Donetsk front, while simultaneously restricting its capacity to conduct large-scale assaults. Recent battlefield reports indicate that drone warfare has become one of the most decisive elements shaping the confrontation in this region. One of the operations widely discussed in Ukrainian military reports involved the Phoenix unit of the Ukrainian State Border Guard Service. According to operational summaries, the unit targeted 2 Russian tanks operating on the Donetsk axis. Drone operators first immobilized the vehicles by striking critical components, preventing them from moving. Once the tanks were disabled, additional munitions were deployed to destroy them completely. Ukrainian officials say the operation demonstrated how modern drone tactics can neutralize heavily armored equipment, even when it is equipped with modern protection systems. Military analysts emphasize that Russian armored doctrine traditionally relies on rapid movement of tanks and armored vehicles to break defensive lines and exploit weaknesses. However, winter conditions have reduced the effectiveness of these tactics. Frozen terrain, limited mobility, and constant surveillance by Ukrainian drones have slowed Russian armored formations. The destruction of individual tanks not only reduces the number of available vehicles, but also limits the ability of Russian forces to maneuver across contested areas of the Donetsk region. Another operation recorded near the same front line took place on February 28, according to footage released by United 24 Media. The operation involved a special Ukrainian detachment operating within the area of responsibility associated with the 20th Army Corps sector. The unit, identified in reports as Lasar's Group, used large unmanned aerial vehicles known as Baba Yaga drones to pursue Russian multiple rocket launch systems. Video from the operation shows one Russian Grad multiple rocket launcher attempting to escape along a forest road after being detected by Ukrainian reconnaissance. The drone follows the vehicle at low altitude while operators guide the strike remotely. The first munition hits the vehicle directly, forcing it to slow down and eventually stop. Shortly afterward, additional explosive payloads are dropped from the drone. The Grad system catches fire and is destroyed. Footage indicates that Russian soldiers near the vehicle attempted to continue moving it before the final detonation rendered the launcher unusable. The same operation also targeted a second Grad launcher positioned nearby. Unlike the first vehicle, this system was stationary when it was detected by Ukrainian drones. Precision munitions dropped from the aerial platform struck the launcher, causing a large explosion and destroying the vehicle completely. Ukrainian sources say both rocket systems were eliminated during the operation. Analysts monitoring the conflict note that the destruction of rocket artillery systems can significantly affect battlefield dynamics. Multiple launch rocket systems, such as the Grad, are used by Russian forces to deliver concentrated barrages against defensive positions and infrastructure. The loss of these systems reduces the volume of artillery fire that can be directed toward Ukrainian lines and limits Russia's ability to conduct sustained bombardment of nearby settlements. In parallel with strikes against ground equipment, Ukrainian forces have also targeted Russian air defense assets. Ukrainian military officials reported the destruction of elements belonging to a Russian S-300 air defense system in the Donetsk region. According to operational reports, both a radar station and a missile launcher were struck by drones during the mission. The attack was carried out by fighters from the 1st Separate Special Purpose Center. The elimination of radar and launch components of an air defense system is considered strategically important. Radar installations allow Russian operators to detect aircraft and incoming threats, while launchers provide the capability to fire surface-to-air missiles. When these elements are destroyed, the air defense network becomes partially blind. Military experts explain that such gaps reduce Russia's ability to track targets and coordinate missile launches, potentially allowing Ukrainian aircraft or drones to operate more freely in the affected area. These developments illustrate how the Donetsk and Zaporizhia sectors have become critical points in the broader conflict. Ukrainian commanders say continuous drone surveillance and artillery pressure have made it increasingly difficult for Russian forces to maintain secure positions. Russian units attempting to move equipment or reinforce frontline troops are often detected quickly and targeted before reaching their destinations. The operational pressure is compounded by manpower challenges reported within Russian formations. Ukrainian and Western analysts say heavy losses have forced Russian commanders to deploy personnel who would normally remain away from direct combat roles. Reports from the front indicate that medical staff have been reassigned to infantry duties in certain units, including the 28th Motorized Rifle Brigade, operating along what Ukrainian sources refer to as the Karen line. In these cases, doctors and nurses have reportedly been equipped with basic weapons and ordered to reinforce frontline positions. At the same time, Russian military medical infrastructure has come under severe strain. The number of wounded soldiers has increased sharply, and evacuation from forward positions has become difficult due to both environmental conditions and the risk of drone strikes. Frozen ground, damaged roads, and constant surveillance complicate the movement of ambulances and evacuation vehicles. Helicopter evacuations have also become more dangerous as Ukrainian air defense systems and drones operate across many sectors of the front. As a result, some wounded soldiers remain in trenches or temporary shelters for extended periods while awaiting evacuation. Analysts warn that this situation places additional pressure on Russian units already facing operational challenges. The collapse of reliable medical evacuation networks can reduce morale and complicate the ability of commanders to sustain prolonged offensive operations. Taken together, these battlefield developments demonstrate how the combination of weather conditions, drone technology, and targeted strikes is reshaping the conflict across eastern and southern Ukraine. Ukrainian forces continue to focus on disrupting logistics, destroying key weapon systems, and limiting Russia's ability to coordinate large-scale attacks along the front line. The broader strategic picture of the war is shaped not only by battlefield operations, but also by the scale of losses and the economic and military pressures affecting both sides. According to Ukrainian officials and international analysts, Russian forces have suffered heavy casualties during the winter campaign. Estimates cited in military discussions indicate that approximately 100,000 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded during the previous 3 months. Ukrainian and Western analysts say monthly Russian losses have reached between 30,000 and 40,000 personnel, a rate that significantly exceeds the pace at which new soldiers can be trained and deployed. Military specialists warn that such losses create long-term structural problems for Russia's armed forces. Training replacements for experienced soldiers requires time and resources, and many of the troops mobilized earlier in the war are already absent from the battlefield due to casualties or injuries. Analysts note that the large-scale mobilization of around 300,000 personnel announced in 2022 has already been largely absorbed by the war effort. Any new mobilization campaign could place additional pressure on Russia's economy and domestic stability. At the same time, the financial cost of the war continues to grow. Billions of dollars are reportedly being spent on ammunition, missiles, drones, and equipment used during the winter months alone. Military expenditures on artillery shells, guided bombs, and air-launched weapons have increased significantly as Russia attempts to maintain pressure on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Economists observing the conflict say these costs represent a substantial burden for the Russian state budget, particularly as sanctions and economic restrictions remain in place. Despite the challenges facing Russian forces on the battlefield, Ukraine has also experienced serious damage and losses during the winter campaign. President Volodymyr Zelensky has acknowledged that Ukrainian infrastructure and cities have been targeted repeatedly by large-scale airstrikes. According to official statements released on March 1st, Russia carried out more than 34,000 aerial attacks during the previous 3 months. These attacks involve the combination of drones, guided bombs, and missiles aimed at both military and civilian targets across the country. Ukrainian officials report that more than 14,000 guided aerial bomb strikes were recorded during this period, alongside approximately 19,000 drone attacks. In addition, over 700 missile strikes were launched against various targets. Many of these attacks were directed at energy infrastructure, transportation facilities, and urban areas. The bombardment caused significant damage in several regions and forced authorities to strengthen emergency services and repair networks. However, Ukrainian officials state that the country's energy system remained operational despite the sustained attacks. The government implemented a nationwide resilience program that included the creation of thousands of humanitarian support locations known as invincibility points. More than 10,000 such points were established across Ukraine to provide heating, electricity, communication access, and medical assistance during periods when infrastructure was damaged. Between January and February alone, more than 1,000 of these centers operated continuously, offering services around the clock. These facilities include heated tents, mobile service stations, and adapted train carriages capable of functioning even during curfew hours. Ukrainian authorities emphasize that access to the humanitarian points is free and available to civilians who need shelter, electricity, or internet connectivity. Officials say the network played an important role in helping the population cope with winter conditions and repeated power disruptions. Ukrainian military resilience has also been highlighted in international assessments. Global defense analyses estimate that more than 900,000 Ukrainian soldiers are currently deployed across various military structures, including the armed forces, National Guard, and Border Guard units. These personnel continue to maintain defensive lines and participate in counteroffensive operations across several regions. International reaction to recent battlefield developments has been significant. Western governments and defense institutions have closely monitored Ukraine's winter operations, particularly the counterattacks conducted under difficult weather conditions. Military analysts note that it is relatively rare in modern warfare for an army engaged primarily in defensive operations for several years to launch successful counteroffensives during the winter season. As a result, Ukraine's actions have been viewed by some observers as an important demonstration of operational capability. The developments have also prompted renewed discussions among Western allies regarding the continuation and expansion of military assistance to Ukraine. Diplomatic sources indicate that additional aid packages are being discussed, including weapons, vehicles, and logistical support intended to strengthen Ukrainian forces during the coming months. Officials argue that Ukraine's ability to hold its positions and regain limited territory has broader implications for European security. Looking ahead, military analysts are paying close attention to seasonal changes expected in the coming months. As winter ends and temperatures rise, the ground across much of eastern and southern Ukraine will begin to thaw. This period, traditionally known as the Rasputitsa or mud season, can create major mobility challenges for military vehicles. Heavy equipment, including tanks and armored carriers, often struggles to move through muddy terrain, slowing large-scale offensives. Experts say this seasonal transition may create additional difficulties for Russian forces that have already faced mobility problems during the winter. Vehicles that were immobilized by snow and ice could become stuck in mud once the thaw begins. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, are expected to rely heavily on ambush tactics, drone reconnaissance, and localized counterattacks in terrain they know well. Some analysts suggest that if Ukraine maintains the operational momentum seen during the winter months, it could achieve additional territorial gains along the line stretching from Zaporizhia to Kupansk by the summer of 2026. Such progress could alter the strategic balance of the war. At the same time, Western governments continue to monitor potential escalation risks, including the possibility that Russia might consider extreme